All right. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Working People, a podcast about the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of the working class today. Brought to you in partnership with In These Times magazine and the Real News Network, produced by Jules Taylor, and made possible by listeners and supporters like you. Working People is a proud member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, so if you're hungry for more worker and labor-focused shows like ours, follow the link in the show notes and go check out the other great shows in our network. And please support the work that we're doing here at Working People so that we can keep growing and keep bringing y'all more important conversations. You can do that by leaving us a positive review on Apple Podcasts. That really helps people find us. So please do that. And of course, share these episodes on your social media and with your coworkers, friends, and family members. And of course, the single best thing that you can do to support our work is become a paid monthly subscriber on Patreon for just $5 a month. And if you subscribe for $10 a month, you'll also get a print subscription to the amazing In These Times magazine delivered right to your door every month. Just head on over to patreon.com/workingpeople. That's patreon.com/workingpeople. Hit the subscribe button and you'll immediately get access to all of the amazing bonus episodes that we've recorded and published for our amazing subscribers. My name is Maximilian Alvarez, and speaking of bonus episodes, you guys can probably imagine that the first half of this month was absolutely bonkers on this end. And, you know, we've been racing over at the Real News to cover the war in Ukraine, along with producing all the other, important coverage that we do on a weekly basis. So that's kept me exceedingly busy, and it put us just a little bit behind on this month's schedule. But we've got a killer new bonus episode coming out for our patrons later this week, and we'll have another one out next week. So we're still going to hit our target of 2 bonus episodes for our amazing patrons per month. And if you want access to those, again, come join the party and subscribe on Patreon. All right. Well, you guys are getting a double dose of Working People this week. As you already know, we released an unscheduled mini-cast on Tuesday where I spoke with Dr. Aisha Bonner-Kazad, an adjunct associate professor at the Howard University School of Social Work, and Dr. Sean Peers, a lecturer in Howard's College of Arts and Sciences, about what was then a looming strike at one of the most storied higher ed institutions in the country. And in case you guys missed it, just hours after we published that episode on Tuesday night, and about 5 hours before non-tenure track faculty were set to hit the picket line, the bargaining team and the university administration hammered out a tentative agreement around 3:30 a.m., and the union called off the strike. So I actually got to go down to Howard on Wednesday for the Real News to talk to another faculty member about this historic tentative agreement, which is doubly historic when you consider the fact that the non-tenure track faculty union at Howard has been trying to negotiate their first contract with the university administration for nearly 4 years. 4 years. And it took 4 years and a strike threat for the university to finally take the union seriously and hammer out a tentative agreement. If you want to get a follow-up to our mini-cast, then keep an eye out for that report that I did, which will be coming out at the Real News later this week. And now we are diving right back into our special series of conversations with teachers, organizers, scholars, and activists in Wisconsin that I recorded this past summer as part of a special collaboration between the Real News Network and In These Times magazine for the Wisconsin Idea, a limited independent reporting project that was created by People's Action Institute, Citizen Action of Wisconsin, and In These Times. And believe me when I tell you guys that this episode is a banger. It's an absolute banger, man. You know, when Cameron, Granadino, Hannah Faris, and I were in Racine, Wisconsin, which is near Milwaukee, I had the honor of getting to sit down and chat with retired teacher and longtime organizer Al Levie at the Racine Labor Center. And I have to give a big shout out to my boy John Fleissner, an incredible teacher, organizer, and artist in Wisconsin who connected us to Al and who was an invaluable consultant for, basically this whole series. And I mean, you probably seen artwork by John going viral many times online because it's really good and people love to share it. And we've linked to his work in the show notes because everyone should know about it and everyone should credit him when they share his shit. In fact, one of John's most famous prints, the Defend Public Education print that we've linked to in the show notes, is now a mural that John and his students painted on the side of the Racine Labor Center itself. And it was really, really cool to see that. I actually got to see John painting that when we were there in Racine this past summer. And, when I told John about the series that we were doing, he immediately told me that I absolutely had to talk to Al Levie. And I'm so glad that he did, because talking to Al was one of those experiences that, has just stuck with me ever since. And side note, if you guys want to get just a little sense of how badass this guy is, check out the 2012 article about Al that we linked to in the show notes, which has the absolutely legendary headline, quote, "Wisconsin teacher refuses award from Paul Ryan during MLK ceremony, calling him a, quote, lackey for the 1%. Just legendary status. And so, of course, Al and I talked about the long and coordinated assault on workers and unions that turned Wisconsin into a right-to-work state and that stripped public sector workers of their collective bargaining rights with the passage of Act 10 under Republican Governor Scott Walker. But, we also talked about Al's life as an organizer, the incredible work that he and his students have done to build power in Racine, and about the very real possibility of organizing and mobilizing interracial and intergenerational coalitions of people who are fighting for justice, equality, and dignity. It can be done. And the folks in Racine have shown us that it can be done. And, I know that the world is very bleak right now. And if you are feeling despondent, which you have every right to feel, and you need a good kick in the butt and a shot of real inspiration, then turn up the volume and listen to Al Levie. This is his story.
I'm Al Levie, a retired teacher. I was active in the teachers union. I'm currently in a transitional role as the organizing director for Voces de la Frontera. I have been doing that for 2 years.
Oh yeah. Well, Al, it's really a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for sitting down with me, man. And, for folks watching, this is part of our, expansive collaboration here at the Real News with In These Times for their project, The Wisconsin Idea, right, which is really looking into the kind of changing politics and economics of Wisconsin, especially in rural areas, but not exclusively. And so one of the big stories that we've been investigating on this shoot, right, is, how public sector workers, especially teachers, are faring 10 years after the passing of Act 10, how people are organizing on the ground to build out of the rubble that was left by Scott Walker and the legislature, so on and so forth. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about that, Al, but before we get there, I wanted to get to know more about you. So could you talk to us about, your path to becoming a teacher? Are you originally from Wisconsin?
No. Well, actually, originally I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and it was like a small coal mining town, outside a small coal mining town. My parents were from New York City, and they moved to Pittsburgh. My father was very active in the steel workers. He was a steel worker. He worked at Open Hearth Furnace in Pittsburgh, J&L Steel, which is no longer in existence. And so I guess what kind of brought me into teaching, and my mother at the time was a full-time mom, raising 4 kids, going to school to be a teacher, actually. So from there, they were always very active in the civil rights movement, in the labor movement. So they would take us to different things that were going on in the 60s in Pittsburgh. And so it kind of, my consciousness developed at an early age to be sympathetic towards working people, and to understand that I was a worker, that I would grow up to be a worker. I think a favorite quote was my father saying, "Whatever you do, just do it well. If you're a garbage man, be a good garbage man. Whatever it is, just do it with pride, because there's pride in work." So I started when we were in high school. My folks moved to Connecticut. They wanted to be closer to their roots. My father was a writer. At that time, he was doing industrial writing. It was public relations. And so we moved to Connecticut. I finished out my high school in Connecticut, and I decided to be a worker. So I went to work first as a iron worker. I worked putting up buildings. Then later, because there were layoffs and, outside is, it's kind of a hardship. And so I decided to become a machinist. So I worked at a shop. And there I became introduced into the union. It was a big shop. It was a UAW shop. I think there were 2,000 workers in this shop. So I began to get active in the union. And through that activity, I not only came from a worker background, my folks were also intellectuals. So we would always discuss, debate, read. We were taught to read about working class history and what it meant to be a worker, what it meant to be somebody that be optimistic about the future, but also realistic about what was the plight of workers, both in this country but internationally. So I developed in that way, and so I worked in a shop in Connecticut. Then I moved to Wisconsin. At that time I was married. I had a child, and again I was a worker. I worked at a pretty good sized shop. This was a machinist. So I became active in the machinist union, and I became a steward, stood up for workers. I became active in the legislative and the political committees of the union. But I was rank and file. I was always rank and file. I never had a union position. So I worked there, and then I got laid off. And I decided to go closer to Milwaukee. And I got a job at Waukesha Motors, where they made big diesel engines. And that again was a machinist shop. And again, I was very active in the union. And when I got laid off there was an amalgamated local with, I think there were 7 or 8 shops that were part of it. I decided to organize because there were a lot of layoffs. It was a massive period of layoff. So I organized an unemployed organizing project. We organized all the unemployed, and they fought for benefits, everything from getting discounts from businesses to getting access to medical care to keeping people from being thrown out of their homes. And then I caught the eye of a group called Wisconsin Action Coalition. And they said, listen, could you organize the unemployed in Milwaukee? And I said, sure. So they put me on staff, and I organized about 5,000 unemployed to really stand up. And they were mostly laborers unemployed. They came from all the shops, from UIW, the machinists, the construction workers, like the operating engineers, the laborers, on and on. So we organized on basic issues. They got 50% off the buses. Again, it was healthcare. It was survival issues. But then as part of this group, I was able to connect that to the larger issues, larger policy issues within the state, such as, wealth, taxation, utility, the Public Service Commission and utility rates and hikes. And so I did that. I became an organizer for the Wisconsin Action Coalition and eventually became the Milwaukee organizer. And I had about 90 groups that I worked with. So I did that for 7 years. And then they started to move in a different direction than the grassroots organizing. At that time, we built a very sizable grassroots initiative with laborers, not just they're unemployed, now with people going back to work. We had the first massive lobby days in Madison, where we produced, hundreds, sometimes thousands of people on labor issues. And we took a benign Labor Day, celebration into, like a Labor Day march and rally for folks that, for labor issues. So it started to move in a different direction. And I had been doing that work for 7 years. So I decided, just thinking about it, what could I do that would be productive and use my experience that I had gained? I thought, teaching. So I became a teacher at Horlick High School, which is across the way a bit. And I was kind of a teacher organizer. I came in, and and I was older. I was 46 years old when I became a teacher. So the first 3 years, I learned my trade to be a good teacher, to really understand what I was doing. But in the process, it became very clear that there was that the inequalities that existed outside of the schools existed in the schools. That the kids who had the basic classes, who had very low expectations, they were the working class kids, primarily African American, Latino. So I looked at it for 3 years, and then I started to organize. And I organized a group called Youth Empowered in the Struggle. Well, actually, I organized the kids to participate in an activity of Voces de la Frontera. And it got big media, big press, because this teacher organized these kids in this essentially working class, white-dominated community to stand up on immigrant rights. So it made a big headlines, and there were a lot of criticisms. So the kids decided to start a group. It was called SUFIR, Students United for Immigrant Rights. And we would participate in, all the marches and activities that went on across the state. So then the Black students started to get the idea that, and they would participate. They said, listen, Mr. Levie, we want to have our own group. So we organized an African-American group called Students United in the Struggle. And after a year or so, they decided that they wanted to be one group because their issues were overlapping. It really was an issue of oppression. So they came together and they formed, Youth Empowered in the Struggle.
Is the Latinos and the Black students?
Yes. And then once they did that, the white kids came in because it became a social justice thing. At the same time, I became first a rep for the teachers. And then I became the president of the building, which was the largest building in the district. And at first, the teachers were very standoffish with these working class Black and Latino kids. Most of them, they felt like they didn't want to learn. Teachers were acting like missionaries, right? We are going to bring this to you. We're going to bring Jesus to you, and which is education. You can have a life like we have. So I took a different approach and really listened to the kids. And what happened as a result is so there was this dichotomy until I became the president, and the teachers saw that I was standing up for their rights and working for them. But there still was they tolerated that I worked with the kids. I'll never forget there was a big, it was when Bush, this started in 2004. Bush came to a private college, and we took 2 busloads of kids to a park and ride that was close by. And we had a mock graduation, which made national news, of course. But the teachers were like, Al, you're going to get fired. You're going to get fired. You're going to get fired. We need you. Don't get fired. However, all this shifted. When Act 10 hit, busloads of these kids, Black and brown kids, they went to Madison and they protested. And they were like the life of the whole protest movement, day after day in buses. And Voces de la Frontera paid for it. So after that, it connected these teachers district-wide to these kids. But it wasn't just in Racine, it was also in Milwaukee. We had spread this group. We have 4 high schools in Racine, and there were 7 or 8 high schools in Milwaukee. After, I think it was a couple of years, we were able to, we got enough recognition from the progressive community that they started to fund it, progressive funders. So then I had staff. It wasn't just me, this classroom teacher. So I supervised staff who were working with the kids. I was working with the kids, but they were doing the real organizer work then. So, but once that happened, the teachers embraced the kids. MTEA, the Teachers Union in Milwaukee, they actually pay for a full-time staff person. They got a national NEA grant to pay for a full-time staff person. Here in Racine, we have a full-time YES organizer who you met, Ari. And so what it did was it connected the teachers, and it connected the teachers and the parents and the kids to each other. And it also connected the immigrant kids. When this started, the immigrant kids, and when I talk about, there's a social hierarchy in the schools, just like in society, right? Well, the immigrant kids are the lowest on the hierarchy. Then it's the kids who are first generation. And they try to be, Americans. So in that process,
that was me.
Yeah, there's a lot of antagonism, right? You get annoyed with kids who are immigrant because they're still thinking like old world, right? They want to be out of school. They want to be working at 14 or 13. The other kids are like, I'm a teenager, So there was a split, but this movement that we developed, it broke down the animosity. It really did. It broke it down because they all are part of mixed status families to one extent or another, right? Mm-hmm. So it broke this animosity, and it created a lot of unity among the Latino kids. And as a result of this movement that we developed, so the teachers, were connected with the kids. So I would say 2/3 of the teachers, that maybe it's even 3/4, or it's big. It's like 80%, maybe even 80% of the teachers have this affinity towards these working class kids now. And it came from them supporting the teachers. They remember. It's in their DNA now. These white, middle income teachers from the suburbs, when they saw these kids marching but since that time till now, the kids have taken the initiative on every educational cut that's gone on. They've been right in the forefront with the teachers. Block scheduling, hell no. Longer days, hell no. They're just it's like a drumbeat. So it's inspiring for the teachers. So it's built this connection, and it's built the connection with the parents too. So that's kind of, what my role was to really build this movement as an organizer, as somebody that came from an intellectual, Jewish family. It was to take that and to really analyze what was going on in the school, and to kind of build this unity between teachers and students and parents, in the community. That's kind of there's a lot more I could tell you in terms of give you examples and things of that unity, those points of unity.
Well, I was actually going to kind of ask about that, because I was really curious to know, how from, even when you were working as a machinist and even before that, to kind of when you were working as a teacher, you mentioned that you approached your work as an organizer, right, as a communicator, to other rank and file members on the shop floor, to students who usually don't have people listen to them, that attentively, right, or respect them as having something important to say. I wanted to ask, how you did that, how maybe from kind of a practical level you were able to be an effective organizer in all these sorts of different places and get people who are normally kind of divided within society, or who are often pitted against one another through outside forces. What sorts of ways you were able to, with others, kind of break those sorts of barriers down?
Well, it's really an important question. I think it starts with, I was really given an ideological frame. Both of my parents are socialists, and they were very active, within the movement when there was repression, when there was harassment. So I took politics very serious, and I did a lot of reading, a lot of studying of what is society, or what are the forces within society that make it what it is, and really looking at the class contradictions that exist, and that really looking at racism is almost a foundational issue within our society. I got that from my mother. My father was a brilliant man, and my mother was brilliant as well. But, there are stories, where as a kid on the playground, in a rural area saying oh, this kid was a real, then using the N-word. My mother, I'll never forget, crying, listening to me, when I got home, because we would always talk. So when we were done, she said, I never want to hear you say that again. That's what happened to our people. That's first you scapegoat people, and then you riddle them, and then before you know it, you dehumanize them, and next thing you know, they're dead. So it really struck me. So from that day, I never used racist terminology. And I also was fortunate to do readings that I read at an early age. People like Herbert Aftecker, people like W.B. Du Bois. So I had this frame that showed that and I would look at this issue of why is it that the U.S. has no healthcare, no public healthcare system? Why is it that workers are treated like shit in this country? That you have some people that you don't have. You look in Europe, Other parts of the world, there's full benefits for people. Italy, you get 5 weeks vacation. You all have universal health care. Union membership is 80, 90%. Why is this in this country that we don't have those things? And if you really look closely at it, that racism is a foundational issue, a fundamental issue that has divided workers since the Civil War, that it was used by the South to make tremendous profits. And then it was imported to the North. It existed in the North, but as an institution, it was imported because Northern industrialists saw that they could make great wealth by people being divided. There was a huge divider within the working class, just like male supremacy is a huge divider, where if women are making less, then these men, they have privilege. Even though they don't know it, they have privilege. And they want to hold on to that privilege. So it forced me to really look closely at society. And then when you do that, I could see that once you break down that division and people come together, that they can attain, enormous things. So that was the frame, is that there are all these things, particularly racism, that divide us. And if you break those down and that you struggle for something that's worthwhile, that all these divisions disappear. And then you see the best of people. And for me, I became a better person as a result of struggling. I could see it. I could feel it. I wasn't as petty. I could. And so I think, did that answer your question?
Oh, yeah. And then some. Well, I was wanting to kind of roll that into Act 10 in the Wisconsin Uprising, right? Like, could you talk a bit more about, that time 10 years ago and how people were united in common cause against kind of this sort of ruling class onslaught against working people, and also from could you talk about how Walker and the media were really harnessing that power of division to ram this sort of massive change through?
It was an interesting thing. Before Walker got elected, I was the president of the union. I went to every single member and I said, look, you cannot vote for Walker because he's going to do this, 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 and this. And the Republicans, teachers, and there's a lot of Republican teachers, I'm not a one issue person. I'm sorry, I'm not a one issue person. So I said, you may not be one issue, but you're going to be in a world of shit if he gets in. So then he was in a world of shit, and then he got in. And it set off an explosion with teachers. They were like, hell no, I'm not getting my benefits cut. I'm not getting my this. They were like, and then there was like this call to Madison by the leadership of the teachers. And people just like emptied the schools. And through this process, they became more than what they were. Their whole individuality broke down. And it became a collective idea. And they battled relatives. They battled friends. They battled spouses. People got divorces over Act 10. Because, the husband is an accountant and the wife is a teacher. They have a comfortable life. Well, we can take a hit. Yeah, you can take a hit, but you don't have to live in the schools, So it created unity in a sense. The teachers union failed the teachers. They failed them miserably. Mary Bells, who was the president of the union, and her executive committee, they tried to meet with Walker. They tried to say, look, we'll take concessions. They saw it was coming. And even when he passed it, they didn't believe it. We used to joke that they hid under their beds. So actually Racine, the teachers in Racine, under Jen, myself, Aaron, our leadership, we stormed the WEAC convention as delegates, demanded the resignation of Mary Bells. We passed several motions charting a way forward. And we were kind of like a spark plug for the whole state. And we didn't give up. We didn't give our rights up. And a lot of teachers just didn't give their rights up. They've struggled. In our local, we went from 0 membership to 70% membership. And Jen was the president. I was the membership, chair of the membership committee.
And Jen is your wife?
Yeah, Jen is my wife. She's a real activist. She has a following like nobody's business. So we literally, we staved them off. We had a handbook, which at the end of the contract, they turned it into, we had a contract. And once contracts disappeared, they would just kill the union, right? Well, we had a very reactionary business association that really tried to get the district to just like kill us. But we organized. We organized and we stopped it. We turned a handbook, the contract into a handbook. We were protected. They passed 2 state laws just for Racine. I don't know if you're aware, but there were 2 state laws that they passed. It was such a raging battle on the board. There was an even split between pro and anti-union. And somebody stepped off. It was like somebody stepped off and it was even 5-5. So the votes, every freaking board meeting to replace them, they couldn't get somebody else, right? So they were like a log jam in terms of they could not move their agenda. So then what happened was the state passed a law that said that if there's a stalemate, then the chair decides just for Racine. The law says just for Racine. The Speaker of the House represents Racine, Robin Voss. So they passed this law, and they appointed this woman. Her name was Parham. She happened to be her daughter happened to be one of my activist students, but they appointed her and she was an African American woman. She was their 6th vote. So it got to that meeting, and she was totally torn. She was like, she didn't know what to do, but in the end, she voted with us, and so they went back. The same board, it was a class struggle on our school board. They went back and they found that she had this felony conviction for when she was a teenager. She wrote a bad check on her mother's checkbook that her mother prosecuted just to teach tough love kind of a thing. So they forced her to resign, and they put in a right-wing guy on the school board. However, then they passed a second law against Racine, which was that we had an at-large voting district, so that all the school board members, you would vote all over the district, which to me, it doesn't seem right to begin with. It should be, like in your district. But they passed it because they wanted to clean out all the progressives from the school board. So Jen, myself, Aaron, we were the heads of I wasn't the head. I was just really like the organizer. But we working with the kids in VOSAs, there was all 9 seats were up. It wasn't 3, 3, and 3. They wanted to just sweep it. So all 9 seats were up. We won 8 of the 9 seats. We won. They were just it was like the whole sky had just fallen.
That backfired.
It was a class struggle. It was a struggle to the death. So it unified, and the teachers were crying. The school board members all came to the REA office, and they were freaking in tears. VOSA's Action put in maybe $100,000 that we recruited for these local school board races. We beat the most reactionary board that you can imagine. So it really led to a tremendous heightened sense of militancy within the union. So in some ways, just like Sensenbrenner built the immigrant rights movement, right? You know what I'm talking about? Okay, well, Walker built the teachers movement. He rebuilt, because in many ways the teachers, and I'm a very strong union member. I've been a member of the UAW, the machinists. I started an OPEIU local when I was at Wisconsin Action Coalition. I was the steward and the president in my building for the teachers. So I'm not bad-mouthing the teachers, but the whole movement, it went from a movement into a bureaucratic operation. And there were certain parameters that they operated within. And within those parameters, it allowed for the right-wing movement to squash the teachers, to squash all the, not just teachers, but everybody. This is now a right-to-work state, and all over the country, the same phenomenon went on. That's why Trump got elected, because unions, they became more bureaucratic organizations that operate within the parameters of the law. Taft-Hartley, all these repressive, laws to keep people from being organized. So it really broke that. George Meany used to say, I never walked the picket line. He used to brag. He was the head of the AFL-CIO, right? Okay, well, then you had a generation following Reagan who were following Paco and Reagan, right? Where they didn't live through Meany. And they were starting to learn through the struggles. And this latest, basically what Reagan did is he tore up the pack of the liberal state. He said, if we do it in Africa, we do it in Asia, what's the difference between workers here and there? Up to that point, it was like, oh, well, hell, we'll just give them some crumbs in America. They can have it was interesting. I went on this guy that we know through political work. He was the president of CASE, 3,000 workers at CASE. And he called me up. He said, Al, you want to go on my boat? He had a nice fishing boat. I love the fish. So we went out on the Great Lake a couple days ago. And we talked. And I brought a young guy with me named Fabio Maldonado. He's the political director of VOSAs, but he's also one of the first. He's a very prominent Latino county board supervisor who's done a lot of good work in this area. And so we went on this trip. And when we got out, I said, he had a good life. I've had a good life. I have a pension, but it's not his work that gave him a good life. It's the fact that he struggled for it and that they won these benefits. You go to CASE now, they make $10 an hour. They have a two-tier system, the old guys and now the new guys. And they went from 8 plants to 1 plant. And the UAW leadership, he was a militant guy. He was a real, rank and file kind of guy that the world was changing, and the leadership of the UAW, they were bureaucratic. They looked at it as dollars and cents. What do we win here? We lose there, but we keep the institution. They were more concerned about the institution than they were about the movement. So that's really an interesting. So that's kind of what is being rekindled. Is the movement. Movement is not a dirty word anymore. It used to be a dirty word, or privilege. When I was teaching, it was like, what do you mean white privilege? The white kids said, I work. My parents work hard. That's not the point. And then Black Lives Matter. Well, all lives matter. I taught sociology. I taught Latino American, African American history. But in the sociology classes, there was a lot of division, So we discussed, we debated these issues, but I think that the times have shifted to the extent where there's a whole new wave of militancy that's grown up. And the young people, they no longer buy into the status quo. They're not, this whole movement with Bernie Sanders, it kind of proves it out. They're not, so I think the world is changing. I think it's changing, and it's the labor movement. And in Wisconsin, actually, Wisconsin really started this whole anti-labor, the recent anti-labor drive with Walker, but, so I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, this is everything that I hope for and more, man. I mean, like, is really important and incredible stuff to hear. And I wanted to actually follow up on what you were just saying, right? You know, to kind of link it back to the targeted assault on the working class and on the labor movement in general that Scott Walker, you know, and the vast network of, you know, money and dark money and influence that was behind him with Act 10, how they, you know, were able to not only sell, you know, this kind of massive political and economic change, but how they were, you know, also doing that deliberately to hobble the labor movement, right? I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, even though Scott Walker was telling the public that, like, after the recession, people are hurting, we're not going to raise your taxes, we're going to balance the budget by basically taking it out of the pockets of public sector workers and so on and so forth. The lie was really obvious in the fact that, okay, if you wanted to just quote unquote balance the budget, then why are you stripping workers of collective bargaining rights? Why are you making unions recertify themselves every goddamn year to go through this long process? And why are you stipulating that in those recertification votes, you need a majority of the membership, not just a majority of the voters? Because you were trying to, like, actively stack the deck against workers. You were trying to bleed unions dry, right? So it was very clear, the more you looked at the details, what was actually going on here. And I wanted to link that to what you were saying about how the labor movement itself, or how, you know, unions, organized labor rather, I would say, had made itself very vulnerable to something like this. And now, like, in the 10 years afterwards, I wanted to ask you kind of like what lessons have been learned and what sort of organizing has emerged to correct for those missteps that organized labor made, that made workers so vulnerable to something like Act 10.
Well, that's a big question, which I'm not fully equipped to answer because I'm a retired worker. However, I believe that there's a couple of things. One was the election. It was a life or death election. People saw it as life or death. That Walker would have, Trump would have ushered in fascism, and people know it. And there was a huge coalition that formed. And I think that those forces, unlike which were similar to what formed under Obama, they're not backing off. They're not like just receding into the woodwork and saying, okay, we won an election. They see this more as a political struggle. I think there's a raised consciousness that didn't exist before. There's a raised consciousness. The ante has been upped with the official labor movement, you know, in terms of it's like, it's do or die. You know, it's like, let's go. We got to saddle up. They've been emboldened. But I also think that beyond those institutions, you have tremendous rank and file struggles that are going on all over the country. I'm dying to see, there's kind of like a pause in teacher strikes. These were rank and file strikes in the South, you know, like we're Virginia, you know, in the West, Arizona, Oklahoma. These are like redneck states. So one part is the official movement has been re-energized because they were hopeless. And I think that they have more hope. And then you have these powerful, powerful movements like the immigrant rights movement that have given inspiration to all these movements. You know, Voces de la Frontera has had 11 general strikes since Walker. 11. I'll never forget the last one. The legislature passed this very regressive immigration bill. Passed it. And we mobilized to Madison. We said, it's time. A day without Latinos, 30,000 people dropped their tools, went to Madison. 30,000 people. Okay, and they've had more. They've had 100,000 in Milwaukee. Okay, so 30,000 people dropped their tools, and along with them were dairy farmers, workers. 60% of all dairy labor is immigrant. So the farmers, they were beside themselves. They said, look, just take half. Just take half of our workers and we'll go. We'll go with you. He's a Republican, redneck. And I shouldn't say redneck. You know, they're hardworking, but they're business people. They're Republicans. You know, and they came to Madison. I'll never forget, because I don't usually speak, but once in a while I like to speak, you know, just for the hell of it. Because it's thrilling. Speak to 30,000 people. They don't hear you, but you're still speaking to 30,000 people, right? So in front of me or behind me were the dairy business people, the dairy farmers. And they were like, yeah, we got to support this. And they went in and they saw Walker. And they went in and saw the legislature. And you know what? Walker vetoed this anti-immigration bill. There was no comments. There was nothing. It's done. And the labor movement in many ways has been rejuvenated by the immigrant rights movement. The Voces is a worker center. Which are part of a network of these worker centers across the country. They have organized thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And I think that they're the most militant, workers in the country. They're not just immigrant, but they're immigrant families. And they've sparked African-American workers. And I think that the labor movement, they can't get enough immigrant or like Latino organizers, because those are the industries, you know, and they're going to be victorious because they're pushing really hard. And if we have an administration that actually does card checkoff, that really outlaws and really penalizes the most blatant anti-union suppression of the vote, you know, for labor for unions, there's gonna be a surge. So I think that I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. I mean, you know, and I think that one of the things that I was kind of thinking of hearing you talk, right, it's very implicit in everything that you're describing and that we've talked about so far, right, is that, after Act 10 especially, you know, some of the kind of lessons that are being lived out by the people who are breathing a lot of life into the movement, like you were just describing, people with Voces, people with other kind of labor centers and social justice movements and so on and so forth. There's a lot of attention to getting the youth involved, across generational solidarity, which seems to be something that people I think are taking a lot more seriously in the past decade. There's more of a focus on, you know, just kind of, I've heard a lot of people, you know, that we've talked to say is getting back to the basics, right? Not overly relying on, a bureaucratic union structure to kind of solve problems for people, and expanding that even more, not hoping that, you know, the benevolence of certain politicians is going to get us what we want, but really working to build kind of broad working class power, you know, through these kind of intimate relationships that you need to build across sectors of the economy, different types of jobs, different racial and ethnic backgrounds. So I guess I just wanted to tease that out of what you were saying, is that it seems like a lot of the signs of hope that you're seeing are coming from people who are kind of really going to the mat and getting back to the basics in that regard.
Yes, that's where you put it really well. And the other part of it is, you can't emphasize enough, the youth are not bought into the system with past generations. They don't believe that they're going to be better off than their parents. So they don't believe in the system. So therefore, they have no stake in dismantling it, which includes dismantling the private healthcare system, dismantling the anti-labor system, and even an assault on capitalism as it exists. So really, that is very hopeful. And the right wing sees it. They're actually frantic. If they weren't frantic, they wouldn't be behaving the way they are. They're trying to stop history. They're gorging themselves. Can you imagine the amount of money that they have, and they just keep accruing every year? It's insane. Even smart capitalists say, we got to slow down. We got to put the brakes on this. We have enough. If we keep going, it's just not going to work. When you have 1% owning, 70% of the wealth of the country, controlling, there's no more middle class. This issue of the white middle, it's not even middle class, working class, thinking that they're middle class, right? They're middle income. But that's all slid. Even millionaires have slid down. Everybody's sliding down except the top. So there's a lot of hope for change. And because they produced a Trump. Trump isn't nobody. He's not this charismatic guy. He's a barbarian. But that's the best that they could do was Trump. And they're not going to win. They're going to lose. And in the end, so it's very hopeful.